Do you love your creative push? Consider taking 2 minutes to leave a nice review on iTunes. By telling how the show has helped you, you'll help other people find it so they can help them too. If you need some simple instructions on how to do it, head to yourcreativepush.com/review. Thank you in advance for leaving a review, and thank you again to those who already have. Your Creative Push, episode 230.
You are only one decision away from starting that thing that you're thinking about. And the only thing that's holding you back is yourself.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngmin Brown, and my guest today is Lori Richmond. Lori is a corporate creative director turned picture book maker. She's the author-illustrator of Pax in Blue and Bunny's Staycation coming in 2018. She's also the illustrator of A Hop Is Up and several other picture books. Lori is also a runner, and she documents her race training by drawing what she sees on her runs in the same amount of time as each run via the hashtag #ViewFromMyRun. Lori, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Youngman.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. I was hoping maybe you could start out by giving us a brief summary, kind of how you got to the point you are today in your creative career.
Sure, absolutely. So I started out in graphic design. That's what I studied in college. And then after a 20-year career doing that, I made a transition over to becoming self-employed. So I'm still doing freelance design, but I'm also working on my picture book projects. And I feel like that whole journey is a whole other podcast. But that's what I'm doing now. And I kind of was feeling like I needed a personal project, just as kind of like a creative reset. You know, like when you're working on something for a long period of time, which is what happens with picture books or very intense projects. You know, you're kind of living with these characters and these stories for months and months at a time. You just kind of want to do something completely different when the project is over. And that's what made me turn to this project I'm doing with View From My Run.
Before we get into the View From My Run, I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, having a 20-year career in something and then kind of making the decision to do something else. I think a lot of people listening might be in that first stage of that where they're, you know, kind of itching to do something different. They're not really feeling fulfilled by what they're doing. So can you talk about that like process, like that decision that you got after 20 years of doing one thing to kind of jump into something else and kind of how that went?
Sure. I think the most important thing is making sure that you are moving towards something instead of moving away from something. And what I mean by that is, you know, everybody has a rough day at work, or, you know, maybe they are not getting along with their boss, or they don't like the work that they're being assigned, or, you know, there's change happening in the company and it just, you know, feels like there's a lot of unrest going on. But that's not a reason to walk away, you know, from the thing that is paying your bills and, you know, and all of that. I think you really need to do a lot of soul searching, and make sure that you are moving to something. And for me, I was, you know, experiencing, you know, a lot of feelings of just not being satisfied at work, and the nature of my industry was changing very drastically and quickly. And it just no longer aligned with my personal goals at the time. And as a hobby, I, you know, turned to drawing, and I hadn't done it in a very long time. You know, like many artists listening to your show, I'm sure, you know, I was drawing as a kid and painting, and I spent my whole childhood in art classes. And I kind of forgot how much joy I found in that, you know, because real life happened. You know, I'm a mom of two. You know, I had my graphic design job and everything was kind of going along. But once I started to not find much joy in my day job anymore, I turned to that as a hobby. And it was through classes and workshops that I had gone to specifically about picture books that I realized, like, hey, maybe this is something that I can be doing as, you know, a side hustle or a side job. And it was just through pursuing it that way, I kind of, well, not only did I sign my first 2 book deals, I realized that it could be a viable source of income. And then I knew that when I decided to leave my job and see if I could really make it work, I had already kind of proven that it could.
Yeah, I love that idea of, because so many people often recommend the idea of just, you know, cutting ties with everything and just taking that leap, you know, just jumping off the deep end and going for it. But I think that's I think that most human beings will be successful with that, but that can be a really painful process. But to do it like you did, to kind of like take baby steps and to kind of have something, the wheels kind of turning on something else so that when you get into it, you already have that momentum built. And it's not just like the scariest thing in the world to just say, okay, I quit.
Right. And you also, I mean, it sounds very, romantic and exciting to just kind of like walk out the door and say, I'm done, I'm going to go pursue my dream. But, there's real life. There's bills you have to pay and, children that you have to feed and, you need clothing. Maybe you want to go on a vacation once in a while. And, you really need to prepare for all of that. So I think that doing it in small steps will help with that. But also you'll make sure that the thing that you think you want to do is the thing that you actually do want to do. Not to mention all the skills that you gain in your day job, which wind up helping you in so many ways that you don't even realize in doing the next thing.
Well, that's a really good point, too, that people don't bring up enough, is the fact that you might not actually enjoy what it is that you're trying to do if you have to do that like 40 hours a week or more, and to really kind of, like you said, take those baby steps so that you know for sure if that's something that you want to do, or while you still have your job and you're still making money, to not have that pressure on yourself to like create this like new job that you hate, so that you kind of know what you like, and you can pivot to something else if that's what you want to do.
Yes. I think just any, steps that you take need to be very informed, well thought out decisions, because it's a big deal to walk away and you don't realize how awesome your direct deposit every 2 weeks showing up in your bank account is until it's not there.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, so then you made the transition to making picture books. Was Pax and Blue the first thing that you made, or were you making some other things before that? Were you illustrating for other people before that? No,
I was really just doing illustration as a hobby. Like I said, on the side of my day job. And Pax and Blue was the first author-illustrated title that I sold. It's published with Simon & Schuster, but it's actually the second book that came out, because I had also signed a book deal with Bloomsbury as illustrator for a book called A Hop Is Up that's written by Christy Dempsey. And just the way the schedules worked out, even though A Hop Is Up was sold after Pax and Blue, it was actually on the market about 6 to 7 months prior. So that was kind of cool because I got to experience, doing that as an illustrator, as like a hired artist to be presented with a manuscript and then, interpret it visually. And then through Pax and Blue, I got to do the whole thing, right, and illustrate the story. And both are great for different reasons, but really, really cool that I got to do both of those things so early.
And for people that haven't seen Pax and Blue, can you tell that story about how you got the idea to create that and then going forward from there?
Sure. Pax and Blue is a friendship story between a boy and a pigeon, and it's an urban setting in New York City. And the themes that carry throughout are kindness and empathy and, taking care of someone who is different than you or smaller than you. All really universal themes, for children and for grown-ups. But the inspiration came because my younger son at the time was about 3 years old, I think, and he was out with his babysitter because, I was at work during the day, and they were taking the train as they often do, and there was a pigeon that was kind of caught in the subway station, and, adults were running from here to there, and our faces are down in our phones, and we're not paying attention to our surroundings. But in his retelling of the story to me, he was saying that, the bird was probably scared, Mommy, like nobody was helping him. I wonder if he got out. And I thought that, that perspective was so pure and innocent and adorable and the perfect, seed to begin a story because children see things that adults don't. And I just loved how in that moment, it was just like, the entire timeline of my book is probably a 10-minute, span of this character's day. But it's one of those moments in time where you have an opportunity to, be kind or to help someone. And I hope that, the story encourages children and their parents to do that.
Yeah, what I love about that story is there's kind of like two things that I love. It's one, it's him noticing the pigeon and like that whole inspiration coming there. And like you said, children see the world in ways that adults don't, but also you're realizing the importance of that story and like kind of seeing the world through his eyes. And I think that the lesson there is like creative people, they see things that non-creative people don't see as well. Like it's kind of getting back to that like childlike wonder about the world, and to try to like keep your eyes open like as you are going through the subway, you know, like not being in your phone or being inundated with all the emails, like really like looking at the world around you to wait for inspiration to come to you. You know what I mean? To find those stories. So I love that story.
Yeah. And as artists, we need to be observers and listeners to our surroundings, to our friends, to, you know, strangers walking down the street, because that's where our inspiration comes from. It's all those, you know, little moments that, you know, like you said, someone isn't going to notice, but the artist who's, you know, paying attention and giving the world his ear is going to hear and see those things that wind up finding their way into the art, whatever that winds up being.
Absolutely. And another way that you do that is the view from my run hashtag that we were talking about before. And my wife is a runner, and she's the one that introduced me to your work. So can you talk a little bit about view from my run?
Sure. So as I said at the beginning of our conversation, working on picture books is a very intense experience. For me, you know, I'm working on sketches for probably about 3 months' time, and then another 3 to 4 months' time of final artwork. And that's if I'm illustrating a manuscript that's presented to me. You know, if I'm doing the writing as well, you know, then it can be years long that I'm working on the book. So I had finished 2 picture books where I was illustrator, and I kind of handed off the work, and I was like, oh my gosh, I really need just a creative reset. Like I need to do something completely different. But I didn't know what that was going to be yet. And I'm in a co-working space called Friends Work here in Brooklyn. And it's run by Tina Roth Eisenberg, who's also known as Swiss Miss in the design community. And she's a huge fan of side projects, and she's always preaching, you know, the benefit of side projects. And I said to myself, you know, maybe that's what I need. I need a side project, but I have no idea what that side project is yet. So, you know, just kind of planted the seed in the back of my mind. But while all that was going on, I had started running about a year and a half ago when I was 39. So I came to it very later, you know, very late in my life. And I was not an athletic kid. I never did sports. I never ran, even if being chased. Like it just was just not my thing. So I was inspired by some of my studio mates at Friends Work here, you know, to start running. And I downloaded a Couch to 5K program. I bought some sneakers, and I was like, all right, you know, I'll give this a try. Cause you know, when you're 39, 40's around the corner, you're like, I got to take care of some things. I got to, you know, put my health, you know, in as priority. So, I started the Couch to 5K program, and then, you know, maybe 2 months later, my studio mates were like, oh my God, the Brooklyn Half Marathon is coming up. We're all going to do it. You should totally do it with us. And I was like, how am I going to run 13.1 miles? Like I'm just learning to do, you know, a 5K. But peer pressure in this case was good, because I said, you know what, whatever, it'll be fun. I'll get a medal. How cool is that? I'll sign up, you know, for the race. And I trained for the race. We did the race. It was super fun. And I wound up continuing to run, and the rest of them like just did the race and stopped. So after that first Brooklyn Half Marathon, which was in 2016, I ran like at least a dozen road races until the next Brooklyn Half, which just passed. And while I was out on a run one night, I really like to run the bridges in Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Bridge and the Manhattan Bridge. So I was out on the Manhattan Bridge one night, and, you know, just doing like a regular, whatever, 4-mile midweek run. And the sunset was so beautiful. Like it just stopped me in my tracks. And it was one of those like, I love New York moments. So, you know what? I'm going to snap a photo of this on my phone because it's just so pretty. Nobody's going to believe me how beautiful it was. So I stopped, snapped a picture, and I kept running. And I said to myself, you know what? Maybe I should paint that, because I haven't done like a landscape kind of work in a while. And maybe that's my personal project, you know, that I've been thinking about. You know, that's what I'll do when I get home. I'll break out the watercolors and I'll paint it. And, you know, I'm continuing my run, and I'm checking my Apple Watch, looking at my pace. And I was like, oh my God, it was just like a lightning strike moment where I should paint it, but let me see if I can paint it in the same amount of time that I'm doing this run. And I knew at that second, I was like, that's going to be my personal project. I'm going to do a series. I'm going to put it on Instagram. Instagram will be my, accountability partner. I'm doing all these training runs anyway, because the Brooklyn half is coming up. Like, that will be my goal. And I'll do, I'll do all these drawings. So after I posted the first one, I got such a great response. And, my friends were like, oh, this is so great. This is so inspiring. Like, go Lori, keep running. And, then I kept doing it. And now, that race has since passed. And now I'm, continuing the series, through other races. Cause like it was picked up in Runner's World, and I got such overwhelming response from the running community and, other kind of runner / creative people. I even had a great Twitter conversation with Hal Higdon, who is legendary in running, and he's an artist as well. And I had no idea. So Hal and I are buds now on social media. So it was just so funny how like all these, things wound up coming out of this side project. And so now, now I'm addicted to it, addicted to running, addicted to View from my run, and keep doing it. And every run I document it like that.
Right. I love how the two things feed each other. You know what I mean? And can you talk a little bit about why is it important to set a time limit for yourself for creating the actual art? I think that's like a really cool thing that you do. So what's the kind of the purpose of that?
Well, there's a couple of reasons why. As I was running and, sort of subconsciously thinking about what my personal project would be, I was noticing so many overlaps between running and making art. They're both very solitary practices. In both of them, you need to show up and do the work. Like if you don't put in the miles, you're not going to get better at running. If you don't sit down at the desk and do the art, you're not going to improve. You're not going to generate more work. Staying within yourself and not worrying about what the person next to you is doing. Everybody's on their own, training plan, whether that's for a race or for publishing your first book, whatever that is. And, artists, I think we torture ourselves because we look at the person next to us and compare ourselves. But running has taught me in art not to do that, but also like pushing through when it's difficult. And I did not think I could run a half marathon, but I did. And I love that challenge, that challenge of like, I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to challenge myself and see if I can. And that's where the time sort of stemmed from. And so I thought like, yeah, I could sit and I can paint this, but then it's just a landscape, it really feels connected to the run for me because of that time limit. It gives me a challenge to see like, it's not really about like how quickly can I paint. It's more of like the experience of painting what I saw takes place in the same amount of time that I experienced the run. So for me, it really connects the two things like on a different level. And then practically speaking, like moms don't have a lot of time,
Yeah.
right? So time management is a huge issue for, a parent that works. And I'm flying solo a lot of the times because my husband travels significantly for his job. So, it's far less daunting for me to know that I'm going to sit down for, 37 minutes and then it's done, and then I can move on to the next thing, helping with homework or whatever it is. So putting the time limit on it also makes it feel more manageable for me in my everyday life. And I think that's why I've been able to stick with it so much because of that time limit. It's helped me in many ways.
Absolutely. Well, you blew my mind with all the comparisons. That is true, like how much they have in common, like the solitariness of it and then pushing yourself and not comparing yourself. Like that's so important and so key for both runners and artists. But I also like that idea of the time limit kind of taking the pressure off of yourself, because we are all busy, and especially when you have, so much work to do and you have kids to take care of, like you said, to be like, all right, I'm setting a timer and I only, I have 37 minutes. It's like you can kind of clear your head up and then kind of enjoy that time more, which is something that I think I try to figure out how to do, or I try to like figure out how to promote how to do, is to like really enjoy that limited time that you do have. So setting a timer and taking that pressure off of yourself and being like, all right, as soon as the timer goes off, I can get back to the normal life. But for now, it's just like me and my art. I love that.
Yeah. And isn't it so interesting too, that the idea of a timer actually takes pressure off, because you would think like the ticking timer, it has such like an urgent, like shroud of like panic, but for me, It's totally the opposite. And if anything, I feel like I focus, if I know, okay, I only have this amount of time. This is the thing I want to draw. How am I going to do it? Where I feel that it's, it feels finished and polished at the end. I find myself strategizing if I see, a piece of architecture or something that has a lot of detail in it. I'll know that 37 minutes isn't enough time to do the whole thing. So I need to zero in on, just a portion of it. So before I actually sit down and do the drawing, I find myself for the first couple of minutes strategizing how I'm going to execute it. And then there's fun things in there too, where like maybe I have a brush that I haven't used ever or in a while, or there's a color that I'm afraid to use in my everyday work. And this is a great, kind of playground for me to experiment with that. So it's really kind of grown tentacles for me in terms of like what I'm getting out of it, and the different directions that I'm pushing myself in when I'm doing it.
Do you ever run further because you haven't found yourself inspired by anything, that you kind of know that you have to draw something, or perhaps like maybe you found something that is going to take you a long time, like a structure, like architecture, so you run further so that you can kind of give yourself extra time?
That's so interesting. Well, when I'm running during the week, it's always before the babysitter leaves. Oh, okay. And she leaves at 6:30. So I really have to organize like my time mentally and, just physically. So I don't necessarily have the luxury of just like extending the running time necessarily, but I will keep in mind what I posted maybe the past couple times. Like if I say, the past two were, I did in black and white. So I know I want to do something in color, so I'm going to keep an eye out for something that I know I can render, in color in roughly the time, that I know I'm going to be running. So I kind of have those things in mind as I'm looking around the neighborhood, and then I get funny looks from people sometimes where like I just stop abruptly, take a photo and literally run away. So there was one time where I was like outside, they must have been their house and they were, loading stuff in the car. And it was their like window box of beautiful flowers. And I was like, oh my God, that's so pretty. And I mean, they looked at me like, who is this crazy woman taking photos of our home, and as they're leaving, as if I'm going to like come back and, do something to their house. So I've definitely gotten some funny looks, but it kind of gamifies the whole thing for me in a way. But then when I sit down to do the drawing, I set a timer, and my kids are my witnesses. I'm always very truthful to the timer. So when it goes off, I'm done.
That's awesome. Yeah, you always find yourself running a little bit faster away from something after you've taken a picture if there's witnesses.
Yeah, exactly. If there's people there, I'm like, uh-oh, I should get out of here.
And so I know you put it out there no matter what. I've seen that you said that. So even if you're not happy with it, why do you do that?
It's, again, the accountability thing. I said I was going to do this, and I'm going to post every drawing. And there's some that are not my favorite, and I'm not going to tell anyone which those are, because that's between me and my drawings. But for me, it's just about like getting it done and putting it out there and saying like, I did it. It's not about like, this is the greatest drawing I've ever made, so I'm going to put it, on Instagram. So for me, it's more of like a visual journal of my runs and my training for these races. And if I leave one out because I don't like the drawing, it's almost like I'm not respecting the run. So I make sure to post something, for every single run, even on the treadmill. I mean, I cannot stand running on the treadmill, but, like tonight, it happens to be, 90 something degrees today. Tonight, I'll probably wind up on the treadmill, or, really, really, bad rain or something. But I'll do something that's in the room, because we have a treadmill downstairs in the lobby of our building. And so, there may be like weights I've done, or maybe something that I'm wearing, like a singlet, or I did my socks one time. So I always figure out a way to record each drawing.
Right. Yeah. It's keeping that daily practice, even if you're not totally happy with it. It's just like putting it out there. And I think some people struggle with that, is sharing the work that they're not necessarily proud of. And then it can kind of add up, like it can be like 2 weeks and you're just not happy with anything. And it's just like, you need to kind of get that stuff out there. And I think that the setting the time limit thing can also help people to practice that, especially if you're telling people, oh, I only gave myself this amount of time. It takes the pressure off a little bit there as well. If you can kind of use that, not as an excuse, but just to like kind of help you to put that work out there, to be like, all right, it wasn't quite finished, but here you go. Here's what I got,
Right. And I think too, it's hard to know when something is finished sometimes, right? Like I think that a lot of times we make art and then we tinker with it and we agonize over it because we're not sure when it's done. And, in this case, like I know exactly when it's done because I hear the thing on my phone beeping. So again, there's that timer like helping me out again instead of, making it stressful for me. So it's been super fun.
And then you also put the distance and time on each piece. Mm-hmm. So is that kind of a similar experience too? Just like sharing a piece of art that you might be kind of insecure about? Are you ever like unhappy with your time or like worried that people are going to judge you for like not having a good run?
I think about that, but I literally like do not care. Like I started running when I was 39. Now I'm 40. I'm a mom of 2. I have a bunch of medals from half marathons that I've run. Like, go ahead and tell me that my time was bad that day because I don't care. I'm not super fast. I'm not trying to win. My 3 goals in a race are always, number 1, to have fun. Number 2, to finish. And number 3, not to injure myself or like fall over and die. Like if I do those 3 things,
very important.
I've had an awesome race. And I think that's something, that kind of feeling of empowerment has come from running, that confidence to say that. My pace is generally between 9-minute miles and 9.5-minute miles, which for me is like an Olympian, for someone who has not been an athletic person ever at all in her life. So I feel really accomplished. And, I've had nothing but positive comments from people. Like, I don't think anybody's even really paying attention to my pace. But, if anything, I get to see my improvement, or I get to see like, oh, I know that the night before I didn't get a good night's sleep, and I know my pace suffered for it because, it's there documented in my drawings, which as I said, have sort of become my journal. So, it's also teaching me about my habits too, about just like having a healthy lifestyle. So I can run well.
Right. Like you said before, running is just like art. You shouldn't be looking left or right or comparing yourself to other people because you don't know when they started running, if they could be an Olympian, and if they just jet past you, like it makes sense that they would jet past you, but to only be worried about yourself and not be like, I'm never going to be like that super athletic person that's been running their entire life that's from Kenya. Like, you know what I mean? It's just continuing to work on yourself and improve your own quote time,
Right. Well, I actually have one funny quick story about that. I did one race. I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of like the dozen that was in between the 2 Brooklyn halves. And I was running next to a guy, and he had to be like close to 100 years old. Whoa. And I'm not exaggerating. I mean, he had like white hair, the long beard, like skinny, like wrinkly. And there are some like, very, very old people that run some of these New York Roadrunners races. And this guy was running faster than me, and I was trying to pass him and I couldn't pass him. And I started to think like, Lori, what's wrong with you? Like, how can you not pass this like old guy? And then I stopped myself and I wouldn't allow my thinking to go there. And I said, you know what? I need to reframe this thought immediately. Like, this guy, he's been running for like 98 of his almost 100 years. Yeah. He is way more experienced than me. His body is more efficient because he's probably been training longer than me. And you know what? Like, I'm going to cheer this guy on and be like, you are awesome. Please beat me because you're amazing and you deserve to beat me. You know what I mean? So, right. And it was one of those, you catch yourself sometimes thinking those things. And the running community is so supportive too, that it's really, really, done so many positive things for me in reframing thoughts like that, you find creeping in sometimes. So I'm sure he finished the race. I'm sure he did well. And I hope he beat me because he was awesome.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a tough thing to do. But I think that if you can reframe yourself that way with anything in life, especially with like kind of a creative passion, because it's different to frame yourself in the idea of kind of like a creative career in terms of a race, because, you know, you could be comparing yourself to somebody who has like already run like 20 marathons and you haven't even started your first 5K. You know what I mean? And you get to see their progress.
Exactly. And it's like, you know, the people that are the quote unquote overnight successes in the creative world, you know, there's picture book author and illustrators who they hit the New York Times bestseller list and you've never heard of them before. And you're like, wow, an overnight success. Her first book, you know, went to number 3 in the first day it was released. And then you read more about that person, and that was actually their 13th or 14th book that they've made.
Right.
But you never see, you know, people don't see all that work that goes into, you know, the creative process. And that's why you really can't let yourself get distracted by what other people are doing. And when you do see people succeed, like, cheer them on, you know, because you're going to want them to cheer you on when it happens for you too.
Absolutely. Yeah, and sometimes people do get lucky and you can like jump on a motorcycle and just jetpack to the end of the race. But you know, those opportunities, those are rare, you know what I mean? That comes very rarely. So it's all about putting in that time, like you said before, that daily practice. Well,
not necessarily daily. Like for me, I respect and admire people that can do the daily practice. Like I can't, because like I said, I'm a solo parent a lot of the times, you know, when my husband's away with the 2 boys. I'm doing my work full time. I have a full-time schedule. I'm trying to do my running drawings. And I think that the idea of the daily practice almost sets us up to fail in some ways, because as soon as you miss that daily practice, you start to think like, oh, well, I can't be that thing, because you need to do it every day in order to be it. And I can't, you know, this happens with writers, you know, a lot of writers say you need to write every single day or else you're not a real writer. I disagree with that. I think you need to be consistent. If your lifestyle only allows you to write 3 times a week, but, you know, no matter what, you're sitting in that chair the 3 days a week that you're able to, you're still a writer. You're still moving towards your goal. So I don't like to see people, especially parents, you know, who are trying to pursue creative outlets or a secondary career or whatever, that they can't do it because they can't do it every day. I think it's about setting a goal, move consistently toward the goal, and fit it into your life without feeling guilty.
And then what happens when you do kind of set a goal, like you're going to do it, you know, 3 times a week or 4 times a week or 1 time a week? You kind of set that self-imposed goal for yourself. What happens then when life does get in the way and you do miss one of those times? Like, what is the balance there of, you know, being hard on yourself but not being too hard on yourself?
Well, I think you need to then just like move it around. You know, still, you know, if you were doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and a Wednesday, you know, your kid gets sick, or you get a thing from the teacher that says, guess what? You have to make a diorama in the next 24 hours and buy all these art supplies, you know, that you don't have in your home, and you need to go out and do it right now. Like, that's happened to me. And I say, you know what? Like, all right, wasn't in the cards today. I'm going to do it tomorrow instead. So this week I'll have my Monday, Thursday, Friday schedule. You know, it's like anything. It's just like you fall off the wagon, you pick yourself, you get back on. And, you know, anytime you can have accountability partners, you know, friends maybe that are doing a similar thing, and you're checking in once a month with each other on progress, like, you know, having that accountability helps you, you know, get back up in those times when you do fall off. And it happens to everyone.
Yeah, accountability is super important. And do you have accountability at Friends Work here? Because you mentioned that before, and I think it's like a really cool space. So could you tell the listeners a little bit about that and what you can kind of gain from that?
Sure. So when I left my job, my husband, who had plenty of experience being self-employed, because when I was in my corporate job, he was running his own company for that same, you know, 20 plus year period of time. So he was very experienced in running, you know, a small business. And he said to me, like, you know, if you're going to work at home alone all day, I'm not sure I could live with you, because you're going to go crazy. And, you know, we live at a small Brooklyn apartment. It's not like I have a separate office area. I'd be in this like tiny corner of my bedroom. So, you know, he was really him that encouraged me to, you know, spend the money on a workspace. It's worth it. It's investing in your business and your sanity and the sanity of our family. So, you know, that's what kind of led me to even consider it, you know, because you want to save money, and, especially starting out, because you're not sure how long, you know, it's going to last or where the next paycheck is coming from. But Friends is a great collective of people who are doing all kinds of different things. There's writers, photographers, designers, entrepreneurs, all different kinds of people. And being in that community, not only is the energy great because everybody's self-employed, everybody's, really focused all day and doing their projects. It's a great networking opportunity because, if you don't know how to do something, we have a Slack channel. It's like, hey, I don't know how to deal with this, issue with my client. Has anybody had this before? And then you have this instant support group of people who may not be doing the exact same work that you're doing, but understand, the issue that you're having and can offer help, which is great. But for my creative work, I have two critique groups actually that I share my picture book work with. One group is either in person or over Skype with two women that I know who are local and are published author illustrators as well. And then my other critique group, I think I'm one of the only, if not the only illustrator as well, but it's primarily authors. And that group is, remote people all over the country. So it's just online. But, we have certain times of month where we upload work and we all comment on each other's stuff. So having that external input is really important because after a while, you can't really edit your own work. You really need to get that outside perspective. So I have it from a few different sources, which works well.
Yeah, and you need that critique, and it's so hard to get sometimes because, especially from like Instagram followers or, people are always worried about sharing their work and people are going to like rip it apart or just be like super critical of it. But actually the opposite is true. Like, basically, if anybody has a problem with what you post, they're almost never going to say anything. And sometimes you actually need people to kind of call you out for certain things that you're doing wrong that you might not be able to realize. So to have that kind of trusted group that can kind of critique your work without being too harsh on you is really important. So if you can find that to grab onto it.
Right. Exactly. And I think whoever you're showing your work to, it needs to be someone whose their work, you need to have a respect for and an admiration for, because you want someone who, you feel like you can learn from them to be giving you feedback. So sometimes that's hard, I think, to find the right mix of people and it can take a few tries to get, into a group where you feel comfortable with everyone in there and you feel that the feedback you're getting is constructive and helping your work move forward. Sometimes you need to kind of feel it out a little bit before you settle in with a good group. But once you have that, it's really important to practice.
Absolutely. Lori, this has been awesome, but it is time for the final push. And this is where I ask you to kind of reach through the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today. And just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
I love this. Okay, so I'm reaching through the microphone, I'm grabbing the shoulders, and I'm telling the listeners, you are only one decision away from starting that thing that you're thinking about. And the only thing that's holding you back is yourself. If you make that decision today, tomorrow, hopefully today, to say, I'm going to take one step towards starting this thing, you've already won. You're already doing it. So, stop making excuses and just make that one decision and keep pushing forward and you'll be on your way.
Absolutely. And to wrap it up really cornily, you can't finish that race unless you take that first step. So I had to say it.
Oh, yeah. And then maybe you'll get a medal at the end.
Yeah, you will.
Which is really cool.
And medals come in many different shapes and forms. So, Lori, you get a medal for this interview. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks
and for giving us that push. Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah, it was super fun.
And you can find Lori on her website, which is loridraws.com. On Instagram, she is Lori Richmond Draws. That's Lori. And you can find everything we talked about today at yourcreativepush.com/Lori Richmond. Lori, thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh man, so much fun talking with Lori. And I just love how she was able to combine two of her passions, art and running, and just kind of mind-blowing all of the similarities that training for a marathon and getting to your creative passion have in common. But I think my favorite part of all of this was the idea of setting a timer and how she only spends the amount of time that she went on her run to do her drawing. And that's really something for you to consider, to set a timer, because there's so many benefits that I didn't really even think about when using a timer. First of all, it takes away that pressure. Sometimes the idea of getting to a creative project, especially a big one, can seem daunting, and taking that first step is pretty hard. But if you have a timer, you know that you only have 30 minutes, an hour, whatever the amount of time that you're going to set for yourself, and that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, so it gets easier to get to your creative passion. It also makes you strategize and to give yourself a plan before you get to your work because you know that you only have a limited time, so it makes that time much more worthwhile. And perhaps my favorite benefit of using a timer is that it gives you permission to call a piece done. That is something that I think every creative person deals with, is the idea that a piece is never quite finished in our eyes because we are perfectionists. But when you only give yourself a certain amount of time, when that bell rings, when that timer goes off, you can now call it done. And not only can you call it done, but then you can freely share it on social media. If you add a little note that says, I only spent 30 minutes on this today, I only spent 1 hour, you put that statistic in your description next to the piece or on the piece itself, now you can have that, quote, excuse as to why it's not absolutely perfect up to your standards, and you can move on to the next thing. So something to really think about, to add those kinds of statistics. The amount of time it took you to do it, where you were when you did it. Add those details to your creative project so that it can be kind of a timeline, an artistic journal for you to go back to remember those pieces. And also a really perfect tie-in to our last episode with Sarah Goldhagen about how our surroundings really do affect us, both our health and our creativity. What Lori's doing at Friends Work Here, and definitely something for you to consider if you do not have a accountability partner, if you don't have people to kind of go through this journey together with in real life or online, really consider surrounding yourself with those kinds of driven, creative people. Definitely find a place like Friends Work Here in your community or create one yourself. You can check out Friends Work Here at friendsworkhere.com. On Thursday's episode, we have Danny Ives. Danny is a self-taught fiber artist from Arkansas, and she developed a unique technique that she calls painting with wool, where she creates two-dimensional art actually on the fabric. And I had a really cool conversation with her about that creative process as well as her creative life. You can find Danny on her website, which is DannyIves.com. That's DANIVES.com. Or on Instagram, she is Be Good Natured. Or you can find those links as well as everything we talked about today at yourcreativepush.com/230. But that's all I've got for you today. So hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done, and we will be here for you on Thursday if you need the push again. I love you all so much. Go get some amazing creative work done, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.